Brilliant. Welcome back, everybody. I think it's important at the end of that video, as we did, you see some of the progress that's been made. We have since completed many of the endurance testing runs, and this High Flyer 2 program, which is supported by the UK government through the Aerospace Technology Institute, it's on the verge, on the cusp, as John said, of demonstrating that first flight. So I want to hand over now very quickly to our moderator, Roger Atkins. Roger is editor of Electric Vehicles Outlook, very prominent media personality on the subject of battery electric vehicles and the electrification of transport more generally. And I think a big aficionado and has a big interest in where aviation is taking this technology as well. So Roger, I'll hand over to you to introduce the next session. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much, Dominic, and hello everybody, whether it's good morning, good afternoon or good evening, you're welcome. We've got a 40-minute panel. I've got three fantastic panelists and we've got some great questions to go through, and indeed some great questions from you, I hope, as well. And as Dom says, I hang out on LinkedIn predominantly. I've done so for quite a long time. Some people might say too long. But focus very much on the journey of electrification in all its aspects. And in fact, I got to know Val many years ago. I think it may even be over a decade ago, on some of his early thoughts then and this and that he did. So I definitely have some questions to try and relate what's happened in the past to what's happening now and going to happen in the future. To the point of the panel session, what are we talking about? Well, it's how soon is now. So Richard talked in the first panel session, they mentioned about being on the front foot, being able to show people that here is a solution to not having to be sort of seemingly apologetic to things. So yeah, hopefully within the next, just under 40 minutes or so, we can define what do we mean by how soon is now. Look at some of those, practical realities. So our three panelists are Val Miftakhov, founder of ZeroAvia. As I mentioned, Val's been around the whole arena of electrification in many aspects for some time. Carrie Harris. Carrie is the Director of Sustainability at British Airways. So that's a pretty good place to be. And I like to fly BA, so hopefully Carrie will be pleased to hear me say that. She can check that I have actually, by the way, I'm not just saying it. And then Ed Espiritu is Corporate Development and UA Ventures at United Airlines. So hello, everybody. How are you all?
Good, thank you. Hi, Roger. Thanks for having us here.
Well, it's my pleasure and our pleasure. Let's be honest here. So what I'd like to do before we get into the meat and potatoes of the questions, etc., is just get a couple of minutes from each of you, please. If you can just give us a perspective of, who you are, what you do, and a couple of thoughts that you have. And if I may perhaps start with you, Val. I imagine a lot of people know who you are, but if you'd like to just give us a couple of minutes intro into some of that would be great. So please fire away, Val.
Thank you, Roger. And yeah, so of course, everybody has heard me say a few things over the videos and everything. So I'll give a little bit of different perspective on this, and linking it to what you just said on the history side. So my background is physics, and when I came to the US, I studied a little bit more physics, and then went into management consulting. Learned so the business ropes there, and then started my one of my early companies was Electric Motor Works, and what we were doing initially, we started as a electric vehicle company, and then pivoted to the charging infrastructure, as we saw that charging infrastructure was the biggest challenge that electric vehicles had at the time. And that was about 12 years ago, 2010, 2011. That's when I started the company. At that point in time, Tesla already had their first vehicle. You had, GM was out with the Volt, Nissan with the Leaf, and this first generation of electric cars was coming out. And it was clear that the penetration would not happen if you don't have charging infrastructure. So that's what we started doing, built out the best-selling product worldwide, actually, in the electric vehicle charging space. Built this smart platform around it. The company was acquired 5 years ago, and that's what allowed me to start ZeroAvia. And I'm a pilot myself, so it only made sense that the next venture would be in aviation. So fast forward 5 years, we're in a pretty good spot as an industry on hydrogen electric, on cleaning aviation, and specifically at ZeroAvia. Right. So what we think is important here is to bring the entire market, entire industry into true zero emission future. Right. So it's not just about offsets. It's not just about net zero. It's not just about net zero carbon, right? We need zero climate impact, or as close to zero as possible. And if you look at the growth rates of the industry, and of course, we have wonderful operators here on the panel as well, and they will tell us more about it. But when the pandemic started, everybody was expecting that, hey, there's going to be doom and gloom for aviation for the time eternal, and now we're back into full planes, and people really want to see each other. Right, that really is part of the human experience. So I think with those growth rates that we're going to have, and it's pretty clear that we're going to have them, we need to have pretty radical solutions to the problem, as otherwise all the other industries getting better and better, and I don't want to have our ability to fly and connect to remote places quickly be squished by regulation, for example, that will inevitably come if we don't sort it out ourselves. So it's really important for me personally. It's really important for the industry, I think, and I believe we at ZeroAvia are doing a little bit to help that.
Good. Well, that's a great intro, and you've started to allude to the answer. How soon is now? It's now. It's these days. So that's very good. And you mentioned your early start there with the e-motorworks. I remember when you were at Google, I think you approached me on that. And coincidentally, Mate Rimac was busy with exactly the same thing, because I think you used to hang out with Mate one way or the other. Is that right? Do I remember correctly?
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. We both were working initially on the conversions of BMWs into electric, and now Mate, of course, runs a combination of Bugatti and his own supercar company, which is pretty successful. So we're really good to see the progress.
Well, now it's your turn, Val. It's as simple as that. So that's all good news. It's all about the company you keep. So, Carrie, I'd like to come to you next, please. So, British Airways, a substantial player in the industry, wealth of knowledge and experience, huge brand. Can you give us a little flavor, please, of your journey and that of BA?
Yeah, of course. So Val, I didn't realise your connection to BMW, but yeah, my electric car is BMW, so thank you for your input to that. So in terms of my background, just very briefly, I'd kind of sum myself up as a kind of passionate environmentalist, aviation geek, and also an avid traveller. And so I'm really lucky that my role helps me bring all of those things together. And I've spent over 25 years working in aviation sustainability. So I'm kind of delighted that we're at the point now of actually talking about technology that's starting to come to fruition, because it's been a long time coming. The climate pressure now has never been kind of the need for this change, and this solution has never been more urgent. We're seeing that now. So yeah, I'd say in summary to your question, how soon is now? It's as soon as possible, but we'll get into that in a minute. And in terms of the context for British Airways, we've been working on sustainability for years, but last year we moved ahead and kind of brought this kind of right into the very heart of the business. So we committed to our new program, which is Be a Better World, where we're putting a huge transformation program behind our sustainability initiatives. So working right now on short, medium and long-term solutions. So in the short term, kind of investing in operational efficiency and putting real focus on that right now. but also bringing in kind of carbon removals, carbon offsetting for our domestic operations, and working with customers on how they can take part in carbon offsets and removals and sustainable fuels as well. We've also got sustainable fuel into our operations on a daily basis now, and we're working really hard to scale that up to get to 10% by 2030. But in terms of the topic today, obviously the big focus is on hydrogen. And for us, you know, hydrogen is going to be a really key part of our pathway to net zero. We're aiming to get to net zero by 2050 or ideally sooner. And really, we're kind of delighted to see the focus. I think there's actually 2 big hydrogen events on today, so the more the better. And, you know, we've been working in partnership, including with ZeroAvia. And as Val said, you know, through the pandemic, and actually in the run up to the pandemic, we were working with ZeroAvia through our Startup Accelerator program. And then actually just at the point where we were kind of on our knees, and you might have thought it would be impossible, that was at the point that we actually invested in ZeroAvia. So absolutely delighted to be part of this conversation today and looking forward to getting into the detail.
Great. Well, I mean, listen, you've described, this is your life and passion to sustainability. And of course, any kind of program that you put together, I guess, is, you know, the sum total of a lot of different parts. But a huge part of it inevitably has got to be the aircraft. There's got to be the fleet. So, yeah, I'm glad that's what we're going to be talking about. Thank you. It was really interesting, Carrie. You're in it for the long haul, which is great. Long and short haul.
Long and short haul.
Yeah, Ed. Welcome, Ed. So, Ed, United Airlines, can you tell us a bit more about your perspective then? If I can start to use some analogies, your flight path, if I can put it like that, Ed.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for having me. Good afternoon to everyone there. Yeah, at Espiritu. So I'm a senior manager with United Airline Ventures, and our corporate development team here at United. So United Airline Ventures, it's a corporate venture capital arm of United. And I think there are a lot of parallels here, listening to my colleague at British Airways here. United Airline Ventures, it was officially set up in 2021 to identify promising startups across sustainability, aerospace, and technology. We work very closely with our environmental team here, who have been charged with leading the decarbonization initiatives here at United. Something that our CEO, Scott Kirby, he's very passionate and vocal about, especially across the social media channels. We have goals of being 100% green by 2050. And I think Val mentioned in his opening remarks, that's without the use of traditional carbon offsets. This is looking at technologies and investing in companies that are really developing ways we can truly be no emission, 100% green. And so at United, we're taking a multi-pronged approach to that strategy and to achieve that goal. So that includes investing into sustainable aviation companies, sustainable aviation fuel companies, SAF companies, battery technologies, and of course, hydrogen. We're excited about the relationship that we have with ZeroAvia, and we identified them kind of early on as one of the leaders who could really pave that green path forward as it pertains to developing hydrogen as a viable commercial solution here. Because, part of the venture capital team, we do take risks looking at developing and call it speculative companies and technologies, but at the end of the day, we want to find companies that can create value both environmentally as well as financially. And we think ZeroAvia is certainly a leader in that regard. So excited to be here, excited to talk about the topic we have here today.
Great. No, thank you, Ed. That's very interesting. And I'm intrigued by the fact, well, many things in what you said, but particularly you referenced batteries as well as hydrogen. So before I get into the questions I want to run around with the three of you, I'm going to pick on Val, actually. A question I think a lot of people might want to ask at this point, maybe people listening in, is, given your knowledge and experience then of batteries, batteries and charging with JuiceNet and all the things you've been involved in, you explained it in the video which we saw. So we've got some of the metrics in there, some of the physics behind it, etc. But can you just give us a quick and dirty, why are you going here at hydrogen rather than battery electric aircraft? Can you just give us a quick spin of that, please, Val, before we get into everything, if that's okay?
Yeah, sure, Roger. No problem. As you mentioned, my previous experience was with battery electric cars, and it was not just on the charging infrastructure side. We actually, as part of my company work, we had contracts with at least eight or nine automakers, and very familiar names. Half of those names were announced as partners, half of those were sort of confidential. But what we were doing was controlling energy flows into those vehicles, into those batteries, and with some automakers out of those batteries as well as part of the vehicle to grid system through telematics. Directly linking to the battery in the car. So wherever you show up at any charging station, we could actually control the charging to ensure that the grid does not get strained, and we can extract any additional grid balancing value from the battery. The whole vision for the company was we're going to have all these batteries on wheels, and the total battery capacity will be sufficient to balance the 100% renewable grid, right? Because renewable energy has this problem of intermittency, so you need storage on the grid. There is no storage on the grid virtually right now, and these batteries could provide it. So as part of this process, I've actually got to learn, and we have some former Electric Motor Works folks on the team at ZeroAvia as well. So we have some institutional knowledge on the topic as well, in addition to just me. But what we learned is the battery is actually pretty hard to improve, right? And by now, automotive industry has invested probably over $100 billion into mobile batteries, right? And most of the change, if you look back, let's say last 10 years, let's say of motor and electrification era, most of the progress has been made on cost of systems, right? Not so much progress. Yeah, there is maybe 20% improvements on the energy density, maybe 25% improvement on the energy density over 10 years, but 10x improvement on cost. Yeah. So most of the improvements around process, around manufacturing, around capex utilization, efficiency, and things like that. Yeah. And the reason is because it's actually electrochemically, from physics and chemistry perspective, it's a very hard problem to increase the energy density of batteries while also not trashing completely your cycle life, right? Because from the physics perspective, you move those ions around, you need to have place for them and cathode anode areas, and that creates mechanical stress. The more cycles you have with high energy density, the more damage you create, and so forth and so on, right? So with all understanding around that, it was actually pretty clear to me, despite having worked, or because of having worked with all these battery technologies with automakers, that for high utilization use, like regional aircraft or aircraft in general, right? Regional aircraft gets 10 cycles a day. More typical sort of longer routes, maybe 2-3 cycles a day, but still it's a very high utilization environment. In a high utilization environment, over long distances where you can't stop for recharge, right? If you run out of charge, you're done, right? So you need to actually have sufficient amount of energy for those long flights, plus reserves. We have some regulators here in the events as well, so you have to have 45 minutes IFR reserve plus a mission buffer plus alternate airport and all that. So it's a lot of energy, and it's just clear that it would not be possible to carry with batteries for any kind of real scale commercial application.
Yeah, got it. And look, fundamentally, you're a highly qualified physicist. You understand the detail of this. Of course you wouldn't embark on something if it didn't have that absolute sense to it. So that's a good, but sorry, I didn't want to hijack the whole conversation into that one thing, but I know there would be people watching and listening thinking, what's that about? So that's good. Let me come on to a first question then, which is probably predominantly to both BA and United. So if I can start with you, Carrie, this sort of opportunity typically starts with smaller aircraft, maybe ones that typically your sub brands perhaps use, but could you see, as we're in an urgent situation of adopting zero emission flight, could you see On some routes, you're perhaps moving to smaller aircraft to embrace this quicker. You know, I'm not trying to dig right into your corporate strategy, but I suppose I am by asking the question.
Yeah. No.
Yeah. What do you think of that, Carrie?
It's a really good question, actually, and it's one that we asked ourselves. So when we were going through the kind of Hangar 51, which is our startup accelerator program with ZeroAvia, it's kind of a 10-week sprint. So we looked in detail at all aspects of kind of how we'd introduce this, what the infrastructure requirements could be, what the network implications, where we would start, and this is one of the things that we explored. So, for example, I was saying, you know, it's the expectation at the moment is that we start with smaller aircraft and kind of gradually scale up. I mean, from the research perspective, when we looked at that for our operation, though, it's not really viable, and so for us, we're really remaining focused on the kind of 70+ seater.
Right.
So a kind of 70+ seater operation could operate from some of our smaller hubs, like London City, for example. But even then, really, it's kind of above 70 seats. So in the interim, I'm sure we'll get into the detail, and Val can talk about this. In the interim, it might well be that we see kind of hydrogen propulsion introduced on the kind of short commuter island hopper type routes, and then later scaling up. But what I'm really hoping for is that we see a breakthrough and we kind of get the opportunity to potentially retrofit onto maybe existing airframes or something. And I know like some of the other manufacturers are looking at that too. So I'm kind of open-minded, but I think for our operation, we're definitely more interested in kind of like-for-like replacement of kind of single-aisle short-haul aircraft is where we're focused, really.
Got it. Ed, would I assume that there's a similar bunch of answers to that question for United as well?
Yes, absolutely. I think if you look at anything that's really public out there for United in terms of the growth strategy, it's upgauging, right? Is kind of the theme of the day, really. It's moving, 50 seaters into 76 seaters, 76 seats into narrow body aircraft, right? And so that is our official strategy here, and it's based off of what I would say two main constraints to the smaller regional aircraft market. One is cost, right? When back 30 years ago in the States, right, we had routes, small city routes that were operated by small prop planes, right? And as time went on, those aircraft became more expensive to maintain and really were phased out into a viable commercial operation. So that's one aspect. The second aspect here in the U.S. is the pilot shortage, right? We have a shortage of pilots that are really making it hard for our regional partners to operate some of their routes, particularly those of the smaller gauge 50 seaters. And so that's driving this move towards larger stage aircraft. So thinking about the viability and maybe potential of a solution, hydrogen solution that is best suited for smaller aircraft, I think there's few things going for them. One, it solves some of those economic costs that we had with some of those prop planes that were operating back 30 years ago, right? Lower maintenance burden, for instance, compared to prop planes. And so economically, we can potentially overcome that hurdle. Second piece of it is the pilot shortage. I think depending on who you ask, there's going to be questions on kind of the cycle and the nature of how long that shortage will actually last. And if you believe in some people who think that it's going to naturally ebb and flow based off of the laws of supply and demand, that once we are enticing a lot of regional pilots to become pilots for larger gauge aircraft, that'll increase the supply, and that will allow for new routes to then cycle through, which would then include going back down gauging, if you will, to the 50-seat market. And by the time that cycle plays itself out, there could be a place for a hydrogen retrofitted solution, because the timing may work as such that the development cycle of the hydrogen retrofit could match or align with the cycle of the pilot shortage. So those are two potential solutions to kind of the constraints I laid out on operating smaller aircraft.
Sure. Okay, well, clearly what you're explaining is the dynamics of this are quite sort of complex, and they ebb and flow. You know, it's quite an organic kind of thing. But again, listening to the earlier session, the bottom line to all of this is if you don't start, then you're not going to finish with anything. And, you know, getting to the point of finding solutions that, as and when the opportunities emerge, maybe faster than we think they are, there's a good fit to market. Val, do you want to add anything into that, or shall I jump into the next question? Because I'm very conscious of the time, and I don't want to.
Oh, so really quick on these 50, 70 seat aircraft. This is from a ZeroAvia perspective. This is on our roadmap on the 2027 timeframe, right? So obviously, the first entry into service for us 2025 is 10 to 20 seat aircraft, so sub-regional. And in some regional, maybe cargo routes. So that's definitely coming, but a 70 seat aircraft is coming as well in 2027, right? So within the next 5 years. But I do hope that we will have a number of initial routes that we can start demonstrating, even with the major carriers earlier on the smaller aircraft.
Gotcha. Okay. Good. Thank you. While you're on there, Val, so what about working with other people, engine innovators and incumbents, etc., to try and, you know, explore hydrogen more than perhaps people are naturally inclined to, perhaps, you know, given what the company is, you know, refining and discovering and breaking new ground with. Can you, I mean, without being here, you have to be a little bit careful, I suppose. You can't say everything, but can you give us a little flavor of some of that?
And of course, and Rob in a keynote said a few things that resonated with me. One of them was, you know, we all have to work together on this. And I think, you know, the first reaction that they had to, you know, Rolls-Royce demonstrating the hydrogen turbine was great, you know, awesome progress, right? So just a few days ago, there was a great announcement of the first runs, I think, with the program on EasyJet. So that was great. The more of that we have, the better it is. And actually, in fact, you know, for some of the single aisle, perhaps utilization use cases, a combination of a hydrogen turbine and a hydrogen fuel cell or electric power powertrain would be beneficial for a start, right? So that's maybe how we can get the single aisles that Carrie and Ed want up in the air the soonest, right?
Yeah. Yeah, okay, understood. Carrie and Ed, I don't know if you want to jump in on that question, or I've got a couple more here before, because I can see coming in from the audience as well, and I want to make sure I get everything fitted in there. Is there anything you want to add on that, or shall I jump onto the next one?
No, I think I just really echo what Val said there. Like, the more research, the more progress we're making on this, you know, everyone's learning from each other.
Yeah.
The more we can kind of pitch into that, the faster we're going to get there. So it's all helpful. Yeah, the more the better. Yeah.
All hands on deck, I think they say. I don't know if they say it on airplanes as well as ships, but anyway.
No, and it's not just within, it's not just within the aviation industry either. You know, this is kind of for governments, for kind of research institutions, universities, financiers, you know, everyone needs to be looking at how they can support the industry and get into this. So yeah, that's kind of that's what we need to do, is try and create the technology pool and, you know, signal very clearly that the demand is there from an airline perspective.
Yes, absolutely. Can I just ask then, what's the kind of long-term vision of the mix? Because we're going to have, you know, hybrid, a mix of combustion and fuel cell. I mean, have you got any sense of that, Carrie? I mean, well, as I say, while you're still there, what is the kind of blend of this journey? We can't just jump from one thing to another. There's always bridge technologies, etc., that take us there. Do you have any sense of how you think it's going to evolve?
So, I mean, our pathway looking out to 2050, at the moment, our projection is that we kind of, a third of our emissions reductions comes from investment in new aircraft and technologies. Realistically, at the moment, we're phasing in, the expectation is for single aisle replacements kind of middle of 2030s, and then gradually scaling up towards 2050. So potentially, you know, all our short haul fleet could be operating on hydrogen by 2050. For long haul fleet, we're likely to still be reliant on sustainable aviation fuel at that time. But as I said before, yeah, if there's the breakthrough, if we can move faster, then great. And so there's kind of a third from technology, aircraft, a third from SAF, and a third from carbon removals. Right. Is our roadmap at the moment. Yeah.
Well, okay. Ed, can I ask you again? This might be quite a kind of how can I put it? I suppose commercial question. You know, what's the impact of new fuel going to be on your business models? Because everybody knows the fluctuation in fuel costs impact ticket prices, impact, you know, your profitability, etc. Where do you see the impact of these new propositions, cleaner fuel, etc., on the business model? Is that anything you're okay to comment on?
Yeah, so I think we've actually seen a lot of more recent developments, positive developments here in the States. They just passed the Inflation Reduction Act earlier this year. That includes a lot of incentives for decarbonization environmental initiatives, and that includes hydrogen production, in which hydrogen, companies that were developing hydrogen technologies that were previously not economically viable or not feasible because of that are now all of a sudden viable and commercial, or are commercially viable based off of the passage of this act. And so we have taken a very aggressive approach in identifying companies, at least in that aspect of the supply chain, hydrogen production. For us, hydrogen can be used not only for the fuel cells with something that ZeroAvia is developing, but also as a feedstock for sustainable aviation fuel. So I think that's more of the nearer term opportunity that we kind of are looking to jump on, and trying to identify technologies that are looking to provide hydrogen in that value chain. But once the entire infrastructure for hydrogen at large is optimized and developed, I think there could be a lot of ways that we could incorporate into our network. Whether it is through SAF production, or it may be more economical or efficient to use it to power fuel cells directly. And so more specific goals, I would say, are directed towards the SAF side, but we are anticipating being able to piggyback off of those efforts into creating a hydrogen fuel cell operation for our network.
Right. And can I just say, Ed, I'd like to take the opportunity from over here in Europe. We are deeply envious of the Inflation Reduction Act. You know, I think it's just it's long overdue, quite frankly, but we really need something like that here in Europe, actually. But I won't go off on a tangent on all of that. Carrie, I imagine the answer that Ed gave there in terms of the impact on the business of more, I suppose, how can I put it? Long-term stable fuel costs are a very attractive part of this journey as well as the sustainability proposition.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, yeah, I mean, about the Inflation Reduction Act, you know, that, as well as the kind of jobs opportunities, you know, the fuel security that you just touched on there, it's a no-brainer from a kind of, you know, green energy transition. As well as getting to net zero. So yeah, we dream of having something like that here very soon too, hopefully. And I think just touching on the demand thing, you know, in the UK we've got some considerable support through the Jet Zero Council and the new Zero-Emission flight group that's been established quite recently under that. So it's good to see the conversation starting and ZeroAvia part of that. But I think still, to Ed's point, you know, the government still haven't yet fully taken into account the potential demand that could come from aviation, both for direct propulsion, but also for synthetic fuels production. So I think at the moment, maybe just about half of that is accounted for in the Jet Zero strategy and the hydrogen strategy. And we need to see that stepped up because we need that.
Got a few questions I definitely want to try and get to. I'm going to kind of try and wrap our bit up on this question then. So Val, when we talked about the merit of battery versus fuel cell and all of that sort of stuff, how optimistic are you about the rollout of refueling infrastructure? You know, and how do you see airlines and airports sort of working with the energy sector in that way? Maybe in a very interesting and exciting way, but given that you know, what we've had for decades works really well, everybody knows how to do it, it's very, you know, sort of very reliable. How confident are you about the refueling proposition working out well?
Yeah, and this is super important, of course, for the operators, right? As you mentioned, cost of fuel is a major component of the economics of operation. So for hydrogen, the beauty is that you can have, and I think Keith of NREL touched on this in the previous panel, you have multiple sources of hydrogen. Potential source of hydrogen. You can produce hydrogen electrolytically in this distributed fashion. You can produce it centrally. You can mix and match energy sources that come into hydrogen production. What that means for the operators is the higher stability and higher security of supply, right? So you generally rely on the fully local supply chain of energy, if you will, right? So in a place like California or Southwestern United States, you have local solar energy that you can use in a distributed fashion to produce hydrogen on site or near sites and avoid transportation costs. And in fact, we at ZeroAvia are already producing all our test fuel and looking to produce our commercial fuel, commercial operations fuel on site as well. We're applying some of the interesting smart grid, microgrid technologies that we got some experience with in my previous company as well to this, because hydrogen production is effectively a form of energy storage on the grid as well. So you can actually enable higher integration of renewable power into the grid by scaling up electrolytic hydrogen production. So it helps in this virtuous cycle. So I think the hydrogen production is quite an economical proposition. It has multiple energy sources, multiple feedstocks, and that will allow us as an industry to bring even better economics, more stable economics than fossil fuel.
Yeah, and Carrie, can I ask you, are you confident, because let's do the analogy with electric vehicles. A lot of where the electric vehicle revolution to date has gone wrong is the charging infrastructure hasn't really kept pace in the right sort of way. It's a bit of a mismatch. Are you confident, as Val clearly sounds like he is, that this development path of the fueling infrastructure is going to work equally well as the aircraft themselves?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of work on this, already a lot of studies in the UK. Again, it's one of the work streams within the UK's Jet Zero Council, Zero-Emission Flight Group is looking specifically at that infrastructure. So I think they're going up, but I think what's really, as Val said, what's exciting is the opportunity for kind of local production, multiple feedstocks. So, it won't necessarily be relying on kind of huge infrastructure changes, but maybe that'll come in future. So it can probably be phased. And I think, what we need to get to is something that's easy to use, got high safety record, the way that we're used to operating now, and kind of, sensible distribution. But I think there's no reason why it has to be a replica of what we've seen with kind of fossil liquid fuels. We can do something different.
Sure. And Ed, sort of same question, but just a little nuance to it. Do you see some of the same people migrating across into, for example, producing, electrolysis, as Val alludes to, for example, people like Shell and others? Do you see some of the incumbent energy fueling suppliers to the industry moving over to accommodate electric aviation?
Yeah, we certainly did call it our diligence to find out, how much we can believe in the infrastructure story of this, right? Because I think evaluation with ZeroAvia, it's really what bolstered the business and investment case here is not just their focus on developing a fuel cell technology, but also the amount of work that they've invested into developing the infrastructure, being a leader, having a seat at that table of really guiding how hydrogen infrastructure can develop over the course of the next decade. And so we certainly have our partners, BP, Shell, who we obviously work with on the fuel side, on the traditional fuel side of things. But as we try to explore new, again, I'll go back to kind of the SAF initiatives, they have big hydrogen focuses now with the passage of the IRA, and we are keeping those conversations ongoing to see how this can apply to other investments and technologies that we see, that we invest in. Sure. So, yeah, to answer your question, I think infrastructure. It was a big consideration for us to see what the strategy was there, and we have, we're gaining more and more confidence not only in ZeroAvia but globally of what the market and industry is striving for over the course of the next decade.
Yeah, I'm going to try and rattle through a few audience questions. Apologies that we're coming to this a bit late. So I love this question. Abe says, at scale and at busy airports where all aircraft are using hydrogen combustion fuel cells, will the emitted water vapor create noticeable cloud cover? Now, you're a pilot, fixed wing and rotor. Val, have you got any worries about this?
We haven't done the math on the cloud cover at the airport. I would guess no, because actually the energy density of hydrogen is quite high, right? So you don't need huge amounts of hydrogen, and therefore huge amounts of water that you're reproducing as a result. Also, on the typical trip, only a relatively small portion of the fuel gets used up at the initial sort of takeoff run, initial climb outs, and majority is in overall climb and cruise. So whatever water vapor gets emitted would be emitted in those sections of the flight. So I wouldn't expect a problem like that.
Right. Okay. Good. I didn't know if yeah. Okay. The question was way above my kind of knowledge of these things. So let's have a look at another one. To expand on your question, why not hybrid electric with sustainable aviation fuel versus fuel cells with onboard hydrogen? Will be extremely hard to beat the efficiency, cost, and range advantage of hybrid. That's from Catalin. You're nodding on that one, Edward. Do you want to have a response to that one?
Yeah. It goes back to some of my earlier comments about taking a multi-pronged approach, and that's what our environmental team uses. But within the venture team, we call it kind of a portfolio approach to technology and decarbonization efforts. So I think there's a place for batteries, there's a place for hydrogen fuel cells, and there's a place for hybrid architectures. And I think hybrid can bridge the gap in both time and technology until batteries get there. And I think there is going to be a limit to what batteries can do. And then when you get to kind of the bread and butter of United, the larger regional mainline aircraft, the only possible solutions there are SAF, hydrogen, and maybe some type of hybrid. And so we are open-minded and looking at the different ways that hybrid architectures can be introduced to the portfolio. And in that regard, that's why we've made investments in battery, we've made investments in hydrogen, and we would be open to making investments in hybrid architectures that incorporate some combination of those technologies, right?
No, I think that all makes sense. I think that's called spread betting, isn't it? No, that makes sense. Dominic, I don't know, how are we doing for time? Because we are over the schedule. I don't want to overrun and get in the way of other things.
We're slightly over the schedule. So time for one more question, or either that.
You want to pick one of the questions? You'll pick a better one than I can, actually, I imagine, if you want to have a look. I don't want to, do an injustice to one of the, they're all good questions.
I think there's one here from David Dundas. Does the panel see a limitation of propeller-driven aircraft as the speed of flight increases?
Good questions.
So if you agree, will hydrogen gas turbines be the power plants that replace them? Val, if you want to take that one.
Yeah, didn't quite get the question. Can you repeat it?
Does the panel see a limitation of propeller-driven aircraft as the speed of flight increases? So if you agree, will hydrogen gas turbines be the power plants that replace them?
Well, actually, as I think I mentioned earlier, in the typical jet-powered aircraft, right, the familiar sort of enclosed turbofan engine, it's actually pretty much a propeller engine with enclosed prop, right? So instead of a propeller, you have a fan, a large count of blades, but more and more so, the overall thrust of those engines is produced by a fan, not by a jet blast coming out of a turbine. So the most efficient jet engines have bypass ratios of over 10 to 1, which means that over 90% of thrust is produced by a front propulsor. And then it doesn't really matter what you use to drive that propulsor. So our approach to really larger aircraft is to drive that propulsor with electric motors that will be driven by the fuel cell produced electricity. Maybe in this hybrid configuration where you may have a turbine, especially in the initial stages of introduction, let's say 10 years out. If you think about how we can practically power a single aisle aircraft, it is probably a combination of a turbine and a fuel cell system that operate off the same fuel of hydrogen fuel, and turbine provides just the power assist, but hydrogen fuel cells provide most and electric motors most of the propulsion for the entire flight to minimize the emissions, right, or minimize the climate impact. So to answer your question is it doesn't really matter what drives the propulsor, right? If we have a way to drive it, then we'll drive it in the least climate impactful way.
Got it. Okay. Thanks, Val. And Carrie and Ed, thank you so much. The three of you have definitely taught me an awful lot in that, and I'm sure the audience too. I apologize we haven't got to all of the questions then. I'm sure we can get some follow-up on whatever's coming in, can we not, Dom?
Absolutely, Roger, and thank you so much for moderating this panel, and thanks to all the participants. As Roger said, we won't be able to answer every question coming in because there are a lot for each panel. What we'll do is we'll follow up afterwards. We'll post a blog kind of answering some of the best questions that come in as well.